A cowboy was kneeling in the mud-walled wash of Arroyo Tapiado, both hands clawing through pale sand. His hat lay beside him, brim up, catching grit. His fingertips were raw. His mouth kept shaping one word in the small, private way men shape words when they do not want the desert to hear them embarrassed. Pa. Pa. He was not calling to a living man. He was staring at the first two letters on a wrinkled, hand-drawn map balanced on his thigh, trying to sound them out. The rest of the page, every careful line, every careful word, was a closed door. Above him spread Anza-Borrego in March, a country of contradictions. By noon, the sun poured into Borrego Valley like molten copper tipped from a pan, and the cracked earth shimmered until each breath tasted faintly of salt, the salt of an ocean dead 3 million years and still seasoning the ground. By night, the same air froze, and dew gathered on red ocotillo blooms in beads cold enough to hurt the tongue. From Font's Point, the Badlands looked like waves frozen in stone, thousands of wrinkled ridges folded together like the skin of an enormous sleeping animal. The desert did not feel empty. It felt buried. Everything beneath the sand seemed to be waiting for someone desperate enough to dig. His name was Brennan Lott, 29 years old, a cowboy out of San Diego County. He had followed the only symbol on the map he understood, a small, inked fish. He believed his father had hidden something there, land papers, a deed, a coin, a final sentence he could carry like a stone in his pocket. Instead, his hand struck bone. He pulled up a curved gray slab, heavier than it should have been, and for one terrified second, he thought it might be human. A woman's voice cut down from the rim of the wash. "That is not what you're looking for." He squinted up. The sun was behind her, and at first she was only a shape. Broad shoulders, wide hips, a heavy canvas bag at her side, a small rock hammer in one hand. She climbed down without hurry, choosing her footing the way a person chooses words in a courtroom. When she reached him, he saw her plainly. 26, thick-bodied and strong, dark hair tied back under a sweat-stained scarf, brown face dusted at the cheekbones, large hands scratched by stone. She did not move like a woman ashamed of her size. She moved like someone who knew exactly where the ground would hold and where it would collapse. "Lower jaw," she said, kneeling beside the slab. "Megalodon, about 3 million years old. And if you keep digging with your bare hands, you'll break it." He held out the map without meaning to. Wrinkled, sweat-stained, dense with tiny writing and 7 small drawings. "My father left it to me," he said. "Said our land was inside it." She waited. "I can't read it." She did not flinch. She folded the map along the creases his father had made and set it on his knee like a thing returned, not taken. If someone you loved left you a message you could not understand, would you be angry at them? Or would you keep searching until you found the person who could help you read it? And where are you right now while you listen to this? Somewhere bright and loud, or somewhere quiet enough to hear old things shifting under the sand? Tell me below. I want to know where this story found you. Her name was Phaedra Sull, born 26 years earlier near Borrego Springs, in a place too small and dry to deserve the word town. 3 plank houses, a stock trough, a windmill that worked only when the wind agreed. Her father had been a failed miner who chased silver east and lost it to a partner who could read contracts. Her mother had been a Cahuilla woman who knew which plants would carry a person through a summer with no rain, which seeps still ran in August, which routes the old people had walked across the Badlands before any white man drew a line through them. Both had left when Phaedra was 11. Some said together, some said in opposite directions. The emotional truth was the same. The desert had raised her. She had survived by digging, roots when there was no flour, mineral nodules a trader from Julian bought by weight, fossils from the marine layer where the Dead Sea had laid its bones in patient ranks. After heavy rain, she dug seep pockets along the wash walls and drank cold mud water through a square of muslin. By 12, she could read a sediment band the way a town child read a primer. By 15, she could split a concretion without breaking the bone inside. Her body had grown into the work, and the work into her body. She was heavy and solid, wide at the hips, full through the belly, thick in the arms, strong in the thighs from climbing badland ridges in noon heat. Her back was broad from carrying fossil sacks. Her hands were large, rough, and precise, coarsened by rock and rope, and refined by years of separating bone from sediment, grain by grain. Valley people had mocked her body since she was a child, and somewhere around 20 she had stopped hearing them. In the Badlands, her body was not a shame. It was a tool. It could haul 30 pounds of stone uphill at noon. It could crawl through a mud cave without panic. It could kneel 4 hours with a chisel and not tremble. They called her, in the valley, the daughter of bones. Some meant it with respect. Most meant it like a warning. They thought a heavy woman living alone in a mud cave among fossils must be strange, unfeminine, half wild. Men who came to buy specimens tried to cheat her by half, then by 3/4 when she let the first cheat pass. Collectors praised the fossils and not the woman. Travelers asked if she was afraid. She never explained that she was less afraid of bones than of living people. Her home was the smallest dry chamber in the Arroyo Tapiado cave system. Inside, a narrow bed, one table, fossil fragments lined along the wall like a quiet jury, crates of tools wrapped in oilcloth, a water jug, and maps, some pinned, some scratched into mud. The cave was not pathetic. It was cool in July, dry in February, secret in every month. It was a shelter made of the same earth that gave her work, and that symmetry pleased her. She read land the way other people read books. Which ridges crumbled under weight and which did not. Which sediment layers held marine fossils and which held only gypsum. Which washes flash-flooded first when a storm broke over the Santa Rosas. Where to listen for the small, dry crack that meant a mud wall was about to give. Lines in stone were sentences. Bones were punctuation. Fossils were messages from a world that had vanished but not disappeared. She did not need a man to save her. She had saved herself since she was 11. But survival had made her life small in one way. No one had walked beside her long enough to understand what she saw. Her secret longing, the one she would not have admitted aloud even to the cave walls, was simple. She wanted to be believed. She wanted to be trusted. She wanted, once in her life, to be wanted not despite her strange life, but with it. Brennan Lott stood nearly 2 meters tall and was broad through the chest from a decade of cattle work between Warner Springs and Vallecito. He had the kind of body the territory respected on sight. Sunburned neck, dust-colored hair flattened from his hat, large cracked hands that closed around a rein the way another man's closed around a fork. There was an awkwardness in him, too, especially when he was still, as if his body had been built for distance and did not know what to do inside a room. His clothes were the language of his work. A battered hat creased at the front, a faded shirt stiff at the collar with old salt, leather chaps gone soft at the knees from kneeling beside calves, boots scuffed pale by chaparral, a bandana knotted loose at his throat, a saddlebag in which his father's map had ridden 300 miles wrapped in oilcloth cut from an old slicker. He could not read, not because he was slow, because his life had been work before it had been school. He had learned brands by shape, weather by smell, distance by the ache in his thighs, the mood of a herd by the angle of 50 necks at once. Letters had never settled into meaning for him. They slid off the page like water off a greased plate. When he was 9, a schoolmaster in Ramona had shamed him in front of a room for reading a sign backward, and he had walked out at noon and gone to work for a cattleman who paid in beef and silver and required no signature. He had hidden his illiteracy ever since with small, efficient tricks, memorizing labels by shape, avoiding contracts, pretending he had forgotten his spectacles though he owned none, asking others to read papers aloud as if he were too busy to look down. His father had died 6 months before that March morning and had left him only the map and one sentence: "Our land is inside it. Read it and you will understand." The sentence had tortured Brennan from the day the old man closed his eyes. His father had known. His father had known he could not read and had still chosen written words as the final gift, and Brennan could not decide whether the choice was an act of faith or an act of quiet cruelty. That uncertainty had pushed him into the desert. A man can stand great grief, but he cannot stand not knowing whether the person who shaped him had loved him at the end or had failed to. So Brennan had taken the map and ridden east through the lagunas down into Borrego, hoping that walking the land would do what reading could not. It was not the first time he had run. He had been the man who didn't stay all his adult life, moving herd to herd, ranch to ranch, never long enough in any bunkhouse for anyone to notice that the new hand could not sign for his own wages. He told himself he loved the road. The truth was that staying allowed people to discover him. When Phaedra Sull folded his father's map and set it back on his knee without flinching, something shifted in him he was not ready to name. She had not laughed. She had not softened her voice with the awful pity he had learned to recognize at 50 paces. She had simply said, "Then you need me." 3 small words. They had humiliated and relieved him at once. For the first time, needing help did not feel like being dismissed. It felt like the beginning of a path that had been waiting for him to admit he could not walk it alone. She took the map back to her mud cave that evening and spread it on the plank table by lamplight. Brennan waited outside at first, leaning against the cottonwood post she used to dry plaster strips, uncomfortable in a room lined with bones. Through the cave mouth, he watched her trace the page with the side of her thumb, the way other women traced the seam of a dress they were about to cut. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally called him in, her eyes had the steady tiredness of a person who has just understood something larger than she expected. "Your father was not an ordinary cowboy when he drew this," she said. Or he had learned to look at land the way a geologist looks. There are contour lines, stratigraphic marks, notes about the Pliocene layer, and 7 drawings. He sat across from her. Every time her finger moved along a word, his old shame flickered in his chest. He hated needing the answer. He hated more that the answer was his father's voice, and he could not reach it without her. She did not over-explain. She did not perform her knowledge. She translated the map into a language he already owned. Ridges, washes, slopes, walking distance from the seep at Vallecito, landmarks visible from Fonts Point at sunrise, dangers, the mud walls that fell after rain, the dry falls inside canyons that could break an ankle in the dark. She began drawing a second version on the dirt floor, using only pictures, no letters at all, 7 symbols laid out along a curve. Fish, turtle, flower, horn, star, water drop, circle. They line up, she said, along the old shoreline, the sea that used to be here 3 million years ago. Your father marked 7 fossil points along its curve. He wanted you to walk the coast of a dead ocean. Brennan looked at the curve in the dirt. He did not understand the science. He understood direction. His father had wanted him to walk. They left at dawn. The first point was the wash where he had already dug. She knelt beside the broken jaw and showed him how to work the matrix with the side of a chisel, not the point. Tap, don't strike. The ground gives things up to patience, not force. He repeated the words under his breath as he worked, and by mid-morning they had freed a complete shark tooth the size of his palm, glossy black where the enamel had survived. He held it in both hands and did not speak for a long time. The second point lay east of Fonts Point, where the marine layer broke the surface. They found sea turtle shell, 3 pieces, the hexagonal pattern still visible under dust. She showed him how to wrap fragments in damp newsprint, then plaster strips, then burlap. His hands were clumsy at first, too big for the work, but once he understood the task through touch, his hands learned fast. She noticed and did not say so. They fell into a rhythm across the next 3 points. She identified the right layer. He cleared loose sand. She chiseled. He hauled. She marked the location in her field book with a small inked symbol and a bearing. He memorized the route by body, counting paces, noting the sun's angle, the shape of the western ridge at each turn. She had precision. He had endurance. Once, on the long uphill out of the third sight, he took her sack from her shoulder without asking, and she did not protest, which surprised them both. In the evenings they ate at her cave or under a badland ledge. Beans from a tin cup, hard bread softened in coffee, dried beef she had cured with salt and creosote smoke. The wind moved through the cave mouth with a low, hollow sound, and one night Brennan said, looking up at the ceiling, "Sounds like the desert remembers it used to be water." She turned her head and looked at him a long moment, and he understood, without her saying it, that he had said something she had not expected from him. He could not read books. He was not blind to poetry. He began to teach her, too, in the small ways available to him. How to carry weight high on the back, straps crossed, the load resting on the hips rather than the spine. How to rest before exhaustion rather than after. how to tie a rope sling across the chest so the arms could stay free for a hammer. She had resented the first lesson because she had carried sacks alone for 15 years. By the third lesson, she had stopped resenting it. He was not trying to manage her. He was trying to keep pace with her life. Their attraction did not arrive as flirtation. It arrived as awe in small, private flashes. He watched her read a wall of stone the way another man might watch a violinist, and felt something turn under his ribs. She watched him carry a 40-pound sack of plaster up a slope without complaint, and felt, for the first time in years, that someone was willing to match her step. By the end of the fourth day, they were not lovers. They were no longer strangers. Their skills had begun to fit together like two halves of a map drawn by different hands of the same family. The fifth symbol, the star, lay where the ridges folded into each other so tightly that shadows lied about direction even at noon. Phaedra led by sediment, reading the pale gray band of the marine layer where it lifted toward the surface. Brennan led by sun angle and walking time. They were tired. Water was low. The mood between them had the careful courtesy of two people who had begun to need each other and had not admitted it. She found the coral first. A fan of it fossilized into the hard layer, branched like a small frozen tree. A piece of dead ocean fixed inside sun-baked earth. As she worked it loose, something pale appeared between the branches that did not belong to any sea. Folded paper, yellowed, tied with a thin strip of leather his father used to cut from old saddle skirts. Brennan went very still. She lifted the paper out as if it were bone, set it in his palm, and stepped back half a pace to give him the privacy of his own hands. He stared at the writing. The letters moved on the page the way letters had always moved for him, slipping past meaning like minnows. The shame came back sharper than at the wash, because this was not a property line or a label on a sack. This was his father's voice, and he still could not reach it alone. He held the paper out to her without looking up. "Read it for me." She took it gently. She read in a low, even voice, the way a person reads at a graveside. Brennan, if you have reached this place, it means you found someone to read the map with you. I did not leave you land. I left you a road. Land can be fought over. A road has to be walked. I am sorry I never taught you letters, but I trusted you would find someone whose eyes could help you, and if that person walks with you to the seventh point, keep them close. Brennan did not move. The wind moved instead, lifting dust off the ridge above them and carrying it along the curve of the Badlands in a long, pale stream that looked, for 1 second, exactly like surf. He sat down on a flat slab of marl. He put his hands on his knees because he did not know where else to put them. He knew I couldn't come alone, he said, his voice gone hoarse. Maybe he knew you shouldn't have to, she answered. His eyes reddened. He did not know how to cry. He had not been taught that either. But she saw the grief moving in him, traveling along the line of his jaw, and she did him the great kindness of looking away, at the Badlands, at the long shadows the late sun was drawing across the wrinkled ridges like the slow advance of a tide. She understood then that she had become part of the map, not because his father had foreseen her specifically, but because the old man had designed a journey that could not be completed without trust. She had spent her whole life digging up what other people had buried. Now, For the first time, she had become the person carrying a buried message back to the living. Around them, the Badlands at sunset turned ocean-like. Ridges cast long, wave-shaped shadows. The fossil coral in Brennan's other hand caught the orange light. The Dead Sea returned briefly as memory, and the desert, in its slow, patient way, seemed to be saying that not everything buried was lost. The sixth point, the water drop, lay near a seasonal seep where rainwater gathered in spring among a cluster of granite boulders that had rolled down from the Vallecito Ridge 10,000 years ago. In a desert like Anza-Borrego, water was never only water. It was survival, leverage, proof of accuracy. They arrived expecting solitude. A man was already waiting in the shade of the boulders. He stood up as they came down the wash, brushed sand from his trousers, and smiled the smile of a man who had practiced the smile in a mirror. 35, clean vest despite the heat, a wide-brimmed hat too new for the country, polished boots that had never broken a horse. His name, he said as if they had asked, was Colton Bryce, of Los Angeles, a dealer in scientific specimens. "Miss Sull," he said, "I have heard you are walking a very particular map." Her shoulders did not move, but Brennan saw the small tightening at the corner of her mouth. "Who told you?" she said. "The desert is small, Miss Sull, especially when a woman of your reputation is seen crossing it for 4 days with a cowboy twice her height." He offered $50 for the map. He framed it as generosity. Brennan, who had ridden 300 miles with that map in oilcloth against his ribs, understood without needing the science that $50 was the price a man pays for something he intends to sell to someone else for 10 times that after letting a museum bid against a collector in San Francisco. Before Phaedra could answer, Brennan stepped forward. "Not for sale." Colton's eyes flicked over him with a quick professional measurement. "My friend, you cannot even read it." "No, but I can walk it, and I have walked 6 points already." It was the first time in his life he had answered an insult about his reading without lying. He felt the surprise of his own voice as much as Colton did. Colton's smile did not falter. He shifted to law. "Fossils on public land," he said, "belonged to the public." He would return with a lawyer out of San Diego and the proper permits. The map would be examined. The cave would be examined. Miss Sull's practice of selling specimens to private parties would be examined. He tipped his hat to the air above her head and walked back toward his horse. The wind swallowed the sound of the hooves into the Badlands until there was only the dry scrape of sand against sand. They did not speak for a long time. The thing between them, gathering quietly across 6 days of fossils and meals and walking, had been pushed up to the surface by an outsider, and now neither of them knew how to step around it. Phaedra thought, without saying so, that helping Brennan had exposed her hidden world to men like Colton, the kind who took a woman's life apart and sold it back to her in pieces. Brennan thought, also without saying so, that his father's map had brought danger to a woman who had been doing fine without him. Each was used to carrying burdens alone. Neither yet knew how to set a burden down between 2 people. What he wanted to ask, and could not, was whether she would consider staying with him after the 7th point. He had nothing a written world would respect. He could not read. He owned no land. He did not even know what his father had truly left him. What she wanted to ask, and could not, was whether he would still want her on the 8th morning, the morning after the map ended, when she would no longer be the one reading. She had been needed before. She had not often been chosen. They walked the last stretch toward camp in a careful silence, and the line between usefulness and love stretched between them like a thread neither dared to pull. The night before the 7th point, they sat in her mud cave with the fire low. The wind passed through the cave mouth with the hollow seashell sound she had stopped noticing years ago, and that he had named for her on their second night together. The fossils along the wall watched them in the lamp shadow with the patient attention of objects that had been waiting longer than any human grief. They spoke less than they had on any other night. Earlier in the journey, their conversation had moved easily through tasks and small jokes and the small, endless arguments of two people learning a route together. Tonight, everything felt final. Brennan folded the map and unfolded it. Phaedra cleaned her tools too carefully, wiping the small horsehair brush against her palm 3 times when once would have been enough. He looked at her over the lamp. The shadow moved across her broad cheek and made her face, for 1 second, look the age of the Badlands themselves. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She turned the piece of fossil coral in her hands. She had cleaned it that morning, and the branches caught the firelight in small orange threads. "Because I have dug bones my whole life," she said, "and no one has ever left bones for me." "Your father left a whole shoreline." He waited. He had learned in 6 days that her sentences came in 2 parts, and the second part was always the one that mattered. "And because you cannot read," she said, "but you walked 4 days through Badlands without complaining once. Plenty of men who can read would have quit by the 2nd day." It was nearly a confession. She was telling him, in the only language she trusted, that she respected him. He heard it as more than respect. Neither pushed further. There are moments where a single word too many would break the thing the silence is holding together. He looked at his hands then. Large, rough, dusted at the knuckles with pale Pliocene sediment from the 5th site. Across the table her hands rested on the coral, also large, also rough, dusted with the same pale gray and the white of plaster. Their hands were not the same in skill, but they were the same in origin. Both were the hands of people who lived by earth. He thought, without knowing how to say it, that he wanted to keep eating with her. He wanted to keep waking before the heat. He wanted to keep watching her read the map by firelight. He wanted to keep memorizing the path while she spoke it aloud. He wanted the fossil sacks to keep passing from one shoulder to the other. He wanted her voice to keep reading his father's words to him, even after there were no more of his father's words left. The journey itself, he realized, had become his home, and it was about to end. They slept little. She wrapped the map in fresh oilcloth and slid it into the inner pocket of her canvas bag. He checked the water skins twice, though the second check told him nothing the first had not. Neither said what they feared. At first light, they were on the western trail, walking toward the circle, while the Badlands behind them turned slowly from gray to gold. The 7th point was not dramatic at first. No cave full of coin, no fenced quarter section, no house waiting with its door swung open. It was a low western hill above the Badlands, bare except for a single creosote bush and a flat outcrop of weathered sandstone at its crown. The wind there was steady and clean, and the view was wide enough to make a person feel both small and, for the first time in a long while, Found. Phaedra checked the map one last time. Brennan stood beside her, tense in the shoulders the way a horse is tense before a river crossing. Then the sun lifted clear of the eastern ridge, and the Badlands answered. Layer after layer of orange and gold and dust-pale white rose beneath them, and from the seventh hill the 6 other points aligned visibly across the valley, each one a small remembered place along a long, curving line. The ancient shoreline, the coast of a sea that had died 3 million years ago and had left its bones in the wrinkled skin of the earth. Brennan saw it, not as letters, as land. Fish, turtle, flower, horn, star, water drop, circle. A story written across miles, in a language that did not require him to be ashamed. Phaedra knelt at the outcrop and began to dig with her small hammer and a brush. He knelt beside her. Together they uncovered a tin box no larger than a man's palm, rusted at the corners, the lid stiff with age. Inside lay a second folded letter, and beside it a plain copper ring, hand-hammered, worn smooth, with 2 letters engraved on the inner band. Brennan lifted the ring into the light. He turned it. He could not read what was inside. He held it out to her, the way he had held out the paper at the 5th point, with the same surrender, the same trust. "Read it for me." She took the ring and tilted it to the morning sun. B.L. Brennan Lott. His father had not left him a name in a book. He had left it in metal, on a ring, at the end of a road his son had been required to walk. She unfolded the second letter and read, "You have walked the whole road. This land belongs to no man. It belongs to the sea that once was. But the path you walked to reach this place, that is yours, and the person who walked it with you. Keep them close." Brennan stood slowly. The ring sat in his palm and caught the sun. He looked across the Badlands one more time, at the 7 points and the curve they made, and he understood, finally, what his father had done. The old man had not been mocking his illiteracy. He had not been punishing him with words. He had been teaching him that some inheritances cannot be opened alone, that some maps are only legible when 2 pairs of hands hold them flat. He turned to Phaedra. "I do not know how to read," he said. "I do not know how to write. I do not know how to sign my own name." She did not interrupt. "But I know how to walk. And I walked this road with you, and I do not want to walk the next one without you." He did not kneel. He did not perform. He placed the copper ring into her hand with both of his rough, dust-covered ones, and the gesture said what his mouth could not say cleanly. "This is the only inheritance I was given. I am choosing to share it." She looked at the ring a long time. She had lived alone in a mud cave. She had been called daughter of bones, strange woman, fat woman, digger. She had been useful to many men and chosen by almost none. She slid the ring onto her left hand, and the metal sat against her broad, strong finger as though it had been hammered for her. Then she did one more thing. She picked up her small rock hammer, knelt at the outcrop, and began to carve. 2 letters, slow and careful, deep enough that one season of wind would not erase them. B.L. She sat back on her heels and brushed the dust from the cut. "Now you can read your name," she said. "I put it in the ground." Brennan did not become literate that morning. He still could not read a newspaper. He still could not sign a contract. But he had learned that reading was older than letters. He could read a path. He could read trust. He could read the shape of a life offered beside him. And on the morning of the 7th point, kneeling beside a woman who had carved his name into stone because paper had failed him, he read it cleanly for the first time. 3 weeks later, Colton Bryce returned to Arroyo Tapiado with a lawyer from San Diego and a leather tube of excavation permits. He had expected to find Phaedra's cave still occupied, fossils stacked in crates along the wall, the original map hidden in a flour tin. He found instead an empty room. No tools, no bedding, no fossils, no map. On the long mud wall, carved by the same small hammer that had carved Brennan's name on the 7th hill, was a new map. The same 7 points, the same curving line, but no words. Only the 7 pictures: fish, turtle, flower, horn, star, water drop, circle. A curve joining them, drawn by a woman who knew Earth would hold a line longer than ink would hold a sentence. Colton stood inside the cave a long time. Eventually, he smiled. It was the first time he had smiled with his eyes since he had ridden into the country. He understood. Phaedra had given the map back to the desert. It could no longer be owned the way he had meant to own it. The knowledge remained, but it could not be carried out in a leather tube and sold at auction. Anyone who wanted to read it would have to walk the 4 days she and Brennan had walked, and very few of the men who paid for fossils were willing to do that. He touched the carved fish lightly with one gloved finger, said nothing to the lawyer, and walked back out into the sun. On the 7th hill, the letters B.L. remained on the outcrop. Wind covered them with sand. Wind cleared them again. They came and went with the season, the way the Dead Sea came and went in the shape of the Badlands. Not forever, but long enough. Brennan and Phaedra rode north together that spring toward the San Joaquin Valley, where there was cattle work for a tall, quiet man with strong hands and ground that could be persuaded to give wheat and potatoes to a woman who knew how to read it. Brennan went back to cowboy work for wages, and slowly, over the first year, for a share. Phaedra kept digging, although the digging changed. Wells now, house foundations, irrigation trenches along the rows. Sometimes, when a new field turned up a strange piece of stone, she would sit on her heels with the small hammer she had used to carve his name and brush the dust away carefully, the way she had once brushed shark teeth out of the marine layer. Brennan never learned to read books. What he learned was different and, in the end, larger. He learned to read clouds for rain 3 days out. He learned to read soil between his fingers for the right week to plant. He learned to read a heifer's eye for the first hour of sickness. He learned to read Phaedra's hands for whether the day had been kind to her. Every night before sleep, he traced 2 letters on her back with his index finger. B and L, the only writing he owned, the writing she had taught him by putting it in stone instead of on paper. She did not become smaller for him. She did not become softer. Love did not file her down to a shape the valley people would have approved of. She remained heavy-bodied and strong and direct and earth-stained, and he loved her not despite any of it, but precisely with all of it. Out here in Anza-Borrego, the wind takes many things away. It takes footprints from the washes. It takes loose sand from the badlands. It takes, sometimes, even the names men try to carve into stone. But before we leave Brennan and Phaedra and that copper ring and the 7 marks of the lost shoreline tonight, I want to ask you something. Do you believe people like him can really learn to stay? Or are some hearts simply meant to keep riding, even after someone has finally drawn them a map they can understand? And as you are listening to this, where are you right now? What were you doing when this story reached you? Tell me what you think. I read every comment under these stories.